So the Declaration of Independence claims that all men are created equal, but history proves different. Tonight at 6 p.m. we begin a series of reports to provide context and hope that America can aspire to a more perfect union.
Yeah, home ownership, as a lot of people know, is a big step towards fulfilling that American dream. And redlining wasn't the only way that African Americans were strategically kept out of certain communities. Levittown, Long Island is considered one of the first mass-produced suburbs in the country. It was established back in 1947 by William Levitt. However, the deeds for the initial 17,000 homes in this development came with a clause that excluded African Americans.
The builder Levitt had in his deeds something that said this property can only be sold to Caucasian people. Now, we have to remember, those deeds were approved by the federal government.
The federal government even required Levitt to place a clause in the deed of every home in Levittown prohibiting resale to African Americans or rental to African Americans. Those deeds are still in the homes today. They can't be removed.
Levittown, which remains predominantly white, set the standard for similar suburbs nationwide.
Pix 11's James Ford, who is kicking off our series with his report on Levittown, joins us this morning with a preview of what we can expect. This is really eye-opening, James.
Yes, and thank you very much for having me. Yes, Ian Wilder, a housing advocate, is one person that you saw there. And look, this whole series underscores one major thing, which is that a big root of much of the unrest that we're seeing right now is based on the fact that whites and blacks have been kept apart for generations. And all of this was done intentionally by the federal government. The effects of the racist deeds that you saw just minutes ago, or they're still being felt today. We were able to track down a family who tried to buy a home in Levittown in the early 1960s. Dolores Quintine and her daughter Madeline join me this morning via Skype. Good morning to both of you ladies. It's great to see you again. Good morning. We first saw you in the story that will air tonight at 6 o'clock. But let's have a conversation, if we may, about some of what we discussed and its effect now. Now, in the story, you talk about how you were treated when you went to look for a home in Levittown, which has in its deeds that phrase that it's only open to, quote, members of the Caucasian race. What's your reaction to the fact that that segregation was promoted by the federal government? Your thoughts?
Well, at the time that we went to apply for the home, I had no idea that the federal government was in the middle of it. We just wanted a home for the children and, you know, a better school system. And that's why we went to apply for a house in Levittown. My husband was very excited about it because he had read about it. So he said, let's try Levittown. We had no idea that the federal government was involved.
And we talked about this, and when you all went to look, the person that met you there, the salesperson, used some really saucy language against you, some of which we can't even repeat on the show. Talk about that interaction. This was 1961, as I recall.
Yeah, I believe that's right. We had gone there that day and to look around, and we drove up. They let us drive up, and my husband said he wanted to look inside and see a home. So they said he looked at my husband and he looked at me and he said, wait a minute, you have to get out of here. We don't sell to the N-word. And my husband was he was really taken back because he couldn't believe that this was happening to him in New York. If we were in the South, we could understand it. But being in New York, he did not, he just didn't hit him. Being a veteran, he thought that they, would be open to veterans, but they were not. They told us to get out of here and just leave. So we had to leave.
And the story shows that communities like Levittown, and then after it was established, many, many others like it, barring blacks from living there, kept the races apart for generations, and that is still the case. What effect, Madeline, what effect do you think this has on the country overall? And what effect do you think it's had on the economic health of black families?
Well, I think it had an enormous effect. You know, you try so hard to do better and to be better, and it was just a horrific thing that my parents had to go through. And you know, being young at the time, I didn't understand it until now, years later, as I got older, and now being a part of the advocacy and activism, and which I gently received from my parents. It really hurts. It hurts to the core because at this day and time in 2020 and what we're going through now, it should not be. We should be together. We should be as one. We should learn how to move effectively now through the years, through the generations. And our children, my children, should not have to be bothered with this nonsense. And it has to stop. And for it to come back from 61 and now we're still feeling the effects of it now here in 2020 it's just appalling. But it has to stop at some point. So it really hurt to my core that we're still dealing and struggling with this kind of, you know, racism in you know, in 2020. So yeah, it hurts. It really hurts.
Well, ladies, we can't thank you enough. You've been very, very informative, and there'll be much more with you both in our piece tonight at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
us,
for
and
having
thank
us.
you for having the guts to come and bring the story. We appreciate it.
We appreciate you. Dan and Vanessa, in tonight's piece, you'll get to hear more from them as well as others regarding this whole situation.
James, this is absolutely incredible, but and I'm looking forward to seeing the full series. But I have a question for you about the actual deed, because I know you saw it, which actually says that African Americans are not allowed to own homes in Levittown. Is there any way to change it?
No. No, a deed is like the foundation of your house, right? You can't change the foundation. Once a deed is written on a home, it stays there. Now look, in 1968, the Housing Rights Act rendered those deeds moot. I mean, they're
Right.
still not enforceable, but it's still there. You can go to the deed now for any of the 17,000 homes in Levittown. And by the way, the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of homes across the country, many of which have these deeds. I will say this. Nassau County making an effort right now, 2 legislators there, to open a database that'll be accessible to everyone to see their deeds, because some people just, it's not on their radar screen. They'll be able to see if their deeds have these racist covenants in them.